Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. And in this video, I will be looking at the weekend of May the 16th and 17th, 2026. So the main part of this video will be the 12 signs. I'll be going through all of the 12 signs and looking at how the 12 signs might be impacted by the astrological events of the week. And the main astrological event is a new moon. So we got a new moon at around 26 degrees Taurus, and I certainly want to talk about this new moon because I think that it does matter, and I also want to talk about the overall astrological picture. So here is the chart for the weekend set for midnight on May the 17th, 2026, which is a Sunday. So this chart is really for the middle of the weekend. As usual, I set it for New York. It's just a matter of convenience. There's no particular reason why I've chosen New York. By the way, don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. So, as far as this chart is concerned, the moon at the middle of in the middle of a weekend is at is at 1 degree and 2 minutes Gemini. So to be precise, the moon moves into Gemini on Sunday morning at 3:23 a.m. So that means that if you're in the Americas, it will probably move into Gemini late on Saturday. So if you're in New York, the moon will move into Gemini at 10:23 in the evening on Saturday. So there is a change happening. Moon moving from Taurus to Gemini. So that means the moon moves out of an earth sign and moves into an air sign. We've already got Venus in Gemini and Uranus in Gemini. So the moon moving into Gemini, that means it straight away makes a conjunction to Uranus. So it's likely that Saturday is going to be a more talkative day than Sunday with the moon in Gemini. People will have things to say. Saturday might just be a bit lighter. Sorry, Sunday might be a bit lighter than Saturday. So the problem with Saturday, well, it's a problem. Maybe it's not a problem. But what we do have on a Saturday is a new moon, and I am going to talk about the new moon in detail in a few minutes time. But the new moon, this new moon is at 26 degrees Taurus, and when you've got a new moon, it's the beginning of a new cycle, and when you've got a new moon, you do need to think about what is happening at the exact time of the new moon. And one thing that's happening is you've got a conjunction between Mars and Chiron. So I talk quite a lot about the Mars-Chiron conjunction in my video for Friday, but today, Saturday, that Mars-Chiron conjunction is exact. And we've also got a semi-square between the Sun and Saturn. So that Sun square Saturn is very much connected with the new moon. So Mars conjunct Chiron, Mars is about how we use our energy. So if we've got, and Mars is in Aries, so with Mars conjunct Chiron, it's a time when we feel we need to do things differently. The old ways just feel unsatisfactory, and we may have to respond maybe to some kind of wound, something that's bothering us. Maybe not our wound, it might be someone else's wound, but we have to do something. And so that might be how we experience Mars conjunct Chiron. But Mars conjunct Chiron can just be wanting to be different. We're just going to sort of ignore the usual way of doing things and perhaps do something to really just sort of shake things up. And one thing you can say about Mars Chiron, or at least you could say about Mars Chiron, is that it is that distinction between comforting the disturbed and disturbing the comfortable. And I actually think that that's quite an important theme of Chiron. I do mention this again with one of the 12 signs. I think it's Scorpio I talk about this. But Chiron comforting the disturbed. Well, that's standard Chiron, isn't it? You want to heal. You want to make people feel better. The wounded healer and all of that. But disturbing the comfortable is another side to Chiron. That's more Chiron the maverick, and also Chiron being concerned about complacency, about injustice. People just are comfortable in their little worlds, and Chiron, Mars conjunct Chiron in Aries says, no, that's not good enough. You should not feel comfortable. There are things to worry about. And additionally, we have Mercury is getting ready to change signs. In fact, on Sunday, Mercury moves out of Taurus and into Gemini. Again, that's a big change. The Gemini season is with us, or is really starting, and of course in a couple of days' time the Sun will move into Gemini. So Mercury moving from Taurus to Gemini, Mercury in Taurus. Well, Mercury is a mutual reception to Venus in Gemini, so Mercury does have a Gemini feel to it, even though it's in Taurus. But as soon as it makes that change, moves into Gemini, makes a conjunction to Uranus, suddenly Mercury really becomes alive, and there is a certain sympathy, I think, between Mercury and Uranus. So with Mercury conjunct Uranus in Gemini, there are lots of things we can say, lots of things we can express. We are looking for things that are exciting, and at least we want to talk about things that are exciting. That doesn't necessarily mean that we can put theory into practice, but it certainly is quite a sort of a sparkling combination, having that Mercury-Uranus conjunction, which I think that Mercury-Uranus conjunction isn't exact until Monday, but we're still going to feel it, because we're not just going to. It's not just Mercury and Uranus in Gemini making a conjunction. It's also the Moon. So we've got Moon, Mercury, Uranus coming together, and so as the weekend progresses, things really start to move into top gear. Things really do become quite exciting. But there's always that question: can the potential of that excitement be completely fulfilled? So that's the broad picture for the weekend set for New York. I am going to just talk about the new moon in a moment. We can set that chart for Sydney, Australia, to give a different view. So sort of midnight on Sunday, if you are in Australia or New Zealand, then the moon is still in Taurus, and so the moon won't be moving into Taurus until I don't know, Sunday afternoon. So if you are in Australasia, most of the weekend the moon is in Taurus. The moon is in Taurus. There's less of that Gemini influence, so that's. That is the main thing. And additionally, I talked about Mercury moving into Gemini. Well, I think if you're in Australia or New Zealand, Mercury won't move into Gemini until Monday. And then there is the heliocentric picture, putting the Sun at the center of the solar system. And just a reminder that Jupiter and Uranus are getting closer and closer. There's Jupiter to a sextile, that is. Jupiter's in at 0 degrees Leo, moving towards a sextile of Uranus. And you've also got a sort of Pluto involvement there. So that's something interesting to be thinking about. The desire for freedom and the desire for improvement as well. We want things to be better, and that may say something about the next few weeks. And indeed, with Uranus making a trine to Pluto, that's going to be with us all year. I mean, that is really is an important aspect. And the Earth is at 26 degrees Scorpio, because remember, the Earth is always going to be opposition the geocentric Sun. So the Earth at 26 degrees Scorpio is making a quincunx to Chiron, and that is happening at the same time as it's making at the same time as Mars is making a conjunction to Chiron geocentrically. So with Earth quincunx Chiron, that's talking about, I think, the pressure to do things differently, the pressure to stir things up, to say something which undermines everyone's complacency. But it's a quincunx. It's not entirely easy, and we know we're struggling with it. And then Mercury's making a sextile to Mars, and so with Mercury sextile Mars, you think about what you're saying being quite strident in terms of what one says, perhaps wanting to stir things up. So Mercury sextile Mars at the same time as geocentrically Mercury is making a conjunction to Uranus. So there is quite a verbal feel to the heliocentric picture, which kind of reflects the geocentric picture as well. So it may be a weekend where there is a lot to be said, especially on Sunday. And now I want to turn to the new moon. So here is the chart for the new moon, and this new moon takes place on a Saturday, and so the time of this new moon, London time, I make it 9:01:03. I got that time from astro.com. If you go to astro.com, you can see there are lots of ephemerides and positions of the planets. You can download it all. That's a major resource. But so that is the exact time of the new moon. So it's basically London time. It's on Sunday evening. So in the Americas, it's Sunday afternoon. In Asia, Australia, New Zealand, it will be Saturday afternoon. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, it will be or Asia, it will be on Sunday. So this new moon is at 25 degrees 58 Taurus. So that means that it is quite close to the fixed star Algol. I mean, I think this new moon is about 35 arc minutes off Algol. So if we're talking about Algol, what does that mean? So I mean, if we look at Vivian Robson in his sort of fixed stars and constellations, his book was written some time ago. He goes through all of the fixed stars, and as far as his description of Algol is concerned, I mean, he is quite negative about it, because Algol is the Medusa's head, and remember, Medusa turned everyone to stone. That was what she did, and so her head is a real problem. You can get completely freaked out by Algol, and so new moon on Algol. See, Robson says, Algol represents the head of the Gorgon Medusa, who was slain by Perseus. And Medusa, who was the only mortal one of the three Gorgon sisters, was originally a beautiful maiden, but her hair was changed into hissing serpents by Minerva, in consequence of her having become by Neptune the mother of Chrysaor and Pegasus in one of Minerva's temples. So it's quite a difficult fixed star. And so we've got the sun and the moon on Algol. So, Robson doesn't mince his words, talking about the influence of Algol conjunct the sun. So with sun, violent death or extreme sickness. It can also be, if the luminaries culminate, he will be maimed, mangled, wounded, or torn to pieces alive, and so forth. With the moon conjunct Algol, violent death or extreme sickness. So Robson's really quite negative about it, extremely negative. Now, I'm not saying that all of those things are going to happen, and instead it's perhaps something about the overall atmosphere. It is about negativity. You know, things just things don't work very well, and I think there's also a connection there with jealousy. So I think people are going to be more jealous than usual. And I think that there is some evidence that people who have Algol in their charts can attract a jealousy. But, you know, this new moon, but at least in terms of the negative sides of this new moon, it's not necessarily going to affect us as individuals. It may say something about what's happening on the planet. It could be talking about current events. Now, this new moon is it's conjunct Mercury. Mercury is about 3 degrees off, so there is a mercurial feel to this new moon. It's about, you know, what we have to say. Something has to be communicated. What are we going to talk about? And if it's Mercury, well, it could also be about worries, because Mercury is a planet which you associate with cognitions. You know, what are we thinking about? How are we perceiving things? And so maybe with this new moon conjunct Algol, that could be about negative perceptions. Now, what I find extra difficult about this new moon is the fact that it's semi-square Saturn. It's exactly semi-square Saturn. And I think that the fact that this new moon is semi-square Saturn is probably more of a problem than the fact that it's on Algol. So you can see the semi-square Saturn 45 degrees apart. So Saturn is at 10 degrees 50 Aries. The new moon is at 25 degrees 58 Taurus. So exactly 45 degrees. So there is a Saturnine feel to this new moon. It's quite a heavy influence, and when you throw in Algol and Saturn, there's no way you can be particularly positive about this new moon. I know it's not an eclipse, but still it's not great, and I think it's about restriction. It's just a general feeling of heaviness. And at the same time as this new moon, well, I've already talked about Sun semi-square Saturn. It's taking place at the same time as a Mars Chiron conjunction, and this Mars conjunct Chiron is really close. Mars and Chiron are only 1 minute apart at the same time as this new moon. And, you know, I've already talked about Mars and Chiron. I mean, I think from a personal level, as individuals, we can really use Mars and Chiron as a conjunction. It's, you know, perhaps about healing. It's about justice. It's about saying things that basically have to be said. But sort of on a global level, you might see Mars conjunct Chiron as just being about suffering. You know, the wounded healer. You know, we can see what is wrong with the planet, and Mars represents perhaps war and people taking aggressive action, and Chiron is perhaps the misery that results from this kind of action. So that kind of emphasizes, you know, what I was saying. I mean, it supports what I'm saying. I just don't think that this is at all a good new moon. And we can get a different perspective by looking at the 90-degree dial. So let's put the new moon on. Let's put the new moon on a 90-degree dial. So so there's the new moon on the 90-degree dial. New moons are shown as, well, conjunctions are shown. A conjunction on the dial represents a conjunction, an opposition, a square, or a square. So it might be a good idea to just look at the midpoints that the new moon is on. And so there's Saturn. So Saturn is opposition the new moon. So on a 90-degree dial, a semi-squares are shown as an opposition. So you can perhaps see the difficulties of this new moon. That it is tough, but there might be a silver lining here, because this new moon is on the Jupiter Aries midpoint. So there's Jupiter, there's Aries, and that's arguably the main midpoint. I mean, it's also linked with Cupido, but with Jupiter Aries, yeah, there is a silver lining. That with this new moon, however bad things are, and I think things could be bad with this new moon, Jupiter Aries is about seeing possibilities. It's Jupiter. Aries is the world point. So looking at what Vita says about the Jupiter Aries midpoint. So he says Jupiter Aries, good fortune in general, success. So maybe it is the darkest hour, this new moon. I think although the new moon is difficult, I think that perhaps because it's on a Jupiter Aries midpoint, we can see ahead. We can start to see the possibilities. And with Jupiter Aries, Sun on a Jupiter Aries midpoint, Alfred Witte says Sun on Jupiter Aries midpoint, well-being of a body, to be rewarded for accomplishments in sport, or the moon, happiness of a woman, fortunate with the public, lucky hours. So it's not all bad, and maybe we can personalize it. So if you want to use this new moon in a positive way, do focus on the Jupiter Aries. However bad things seem, things are going to get better. I mean, at least in the short term. And there is a positivity which is just not going to go away. And it just could be that the new moon, maybe in the short term, could be very difficult. But it just may be the light at the end of the tunnel. Maybe we are going to see some improvement. So it's not all bad. And so I would put quite a bit of store on the fact that it's on the Jupiter Aries midpoint. I mean, you've got to try and be positive somewhere. Now, in terms of the world at large, so this chart here is, that's a weekend chart. Here's the new moon chart. So if we look at the world at large, if we do the astrocartography for it, we might see the places on Earth which might be especially impacted by it. So here is the map. So these are all the places where the new moon is on the descendant. You see this yellow line, all these places. So it goes through the Atlantic and crosses southern England and Scandinavia. So I think that there is a possibility that the UK and Scandinavia could be hit quite heavily by this new moon. And we already know that in terms of the UK, there is sort of governmental crisis with Keir Starmer's authority sort of collapsing, and we've got a by-election coming up in June, which a very important by-election. I know that if you're not in England, that might seem completely irrelevant, but I think it's probably one of the most important by-elections ever. So certainly Scandinavia and the UK is likely to feel the impact of this new moon. We already know that the UK is completely traumatized anyway, so that might be something to think about. That here is the Mars. Here is a line where at the exact moment of the new moon, where Mars was on the IC. Mars is on the IC. You can see that goes up through Africa, goes through Harare, the capital of Zimbabwe, and goes through Khartoum. So that could sort of stir things up in parts of Africa. Then, if we take this up, this does go through Kiev. So the capital of Ukraine has Mars on the IC. At the exact time of this new moon, and Saturn, Saturn will be on the ice. Saturn will be on the descendant that looks like Saturn will be on the IC. It looks like Berlin, the German-Polish border. So that might be another place to look out for. So going back to the new moon chart. So this chart is set for London, and so set for London we have 29 degrees Scorpio rising. So new moon conjunct Algol with Mercury conjunct the descendant. That does indicate that things could be quite difficult in the UK. And one thing going on is, of course, the mayor of Manchester, a man called Andy Burnham, is trying to get back into Parliament so he can effectively take over from Keir Starmer as Prime Minister. So if you set the new moon for Manchester, the ascendant is 26 degrees 30 Scorpio. So the new moon is conjunct Algol, conjunct the descendant set for Manchester. And we already know there's going to be a by-election, a critical by-election. But this by-election, I don't think will be until the end of next month. So it's not going to be just right after the new moon. But it just may be that Manchester is maybe an area that gets a lot of focus over the next couple of weeks, and maybe there could be events in Manchester because you've got the new moon conjunct Algol on a descendant here, so that might be a part of England that one perhaps should be looking out for. And if we set the chart to Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, you see that the midheaven is at 27 degrees 17 Libra, and the descendant is the IC is at 2717 Aries. So there is this exact Mars Chiron conjunction on the IC set for Ukraine, and that could say something about the government. It could say something about the country. We know that obviously things are never great in Ukraine. I mean, what's kind of interesting about Ukraine is, I did mention that with Uranus moving into Gemini, because we have just had Uranus moving into Gemini, my feeling was that the emphasis would move back to the Ukraine. I know that we've been completely obsessed about Iran and the Gulf, and that the Ukraine war just kind of got forgotten. But I'm kind of thinking that attention will switch back to Ukraine quite quickly. And if you look at the Western press, it's kind of weird, isn't it, that the moment we had the bombing of Iran, you started seeing lots and lots of stories about how well the Ukrainians were doing, and how the Russians were in increasing trouble, how everything was a disaster for the Russians, and how the Putin regime was going to collapse. And that's just kind of a weird coincidence. And I'm thinking that with this new moon, with the Mars on the IC, maybe people will start to recognise that this is not necessarily true that things really are falling apart for Ukraine. We shouldn't assume that everything is really going well for them. I don't think it is from what I can see. So Ukraine is certainly a country that should be looked at, and Berlin. So if we relocate this chart to Berlin, the capital of Germany. So let's look at the new moon set for Berlin. I should have had this done. Should have had this done earlier. There it is. So okay, here. So if you set the chart for Berlin, you have Saturn quite close to the IC. So having Saturn on the IC, that might say something about the government and the difficulties the government is having. And additionally, we've got true Black Moon Lilith exactly rising if you set that chart for Berlin. So I don't think that this new moon is going to be great for Germany and the German government. And finally, I want to quickly look at Donald Trump. I mean, why not? The thing about Donald Trump and this new moon is that Donald Trump has his midheaven at 24 degrees 22 Taurus. So this new moon is fairly close to his midheaven. It's not exactly on his midheaven, but it's close enough to have an impact, particularly if you're President of the United States. And so new moon might be about whatever it is he's trying to do, some new initiative. I know he's just been to China. So you might see this new moon as being quite positive. On the other hand, Trump does have Mars square. He does have Mars square his midheaven. In fact, his ascendant is at 29 degrees Leo. So this new moon is actually impacting, quite an important sector of his, important part of his chart. So looking at it in more detail. So we put the new moon on the outer wheel. So this new moon is on Trump's Mars midheaven midpoint, and so I'm thinking that it's going to really stir him into action. I mean, he's going to want to do something, and he is, we know he's quite hasty anyway. But the question is, what is it going to encourage him to do? And we shouldn't forget that this new moon is linked with Saturn. So if you look at his chart, there's his midheaven, there's his ascendant. So his ascendant, his midheaven Mars midpoint is going to be approximately at is going to be around a sort of 10 cardinals, so it will be at around 10 degrees Cancer. So Saturn will be square his Mars midheaven midpoint, and so with this new moon, I'm thinking that he might try to do something, trying to take some kind of initiative, but because of Saturn's involvement, it could represent some kind of failure or something really blocking him. I mean, you can perhaps use, if you look at Reinhold Ebertin's combination of stellar influences, and you look at the Mars midheaven midpoint. So Mars midheaven midpoint is about the effort to achieve something. Mars is an angry planet. It's an assertive planet. Mars on the midheaven, it is where we are trying to go. It is where we are almost violently trying to go. And so Reinhold Ebertin says about Mars midheaven, he just says ego-conscious action. And he talks about readiness for action, the ability to make decisions. Well, he's the president of the United States, so there's certainly something he feels he has to do. And I think that the new moon is going to really encourage him to do it. But then, what about Saturn on that midpoint? So he says about Saturn on the Mars midheaven midpoint, he says the inability to make decisions or to concentrate upon an objective, inhibitions, disadvantages through exaggerated zeal, actions resulting in failure, the act of separation, suffering harm or damage. Okay, he could suffer harm or damage, but I'm thinking overall that this new moon could be quite frustrating for Donald, but at the same time, I think he's going to really want to move forward with something. The question is, does he have what it takes? And so, if I were to be advising him, I would perhaps advise him not to sort of rush into it, not to rush into things. I think that might be unwise. So that's Trump, and now I want to turn to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for the weekend of May the 16th and 17th, 2026. Aries, it's quite a busy weekend. There's a lot of action, at least on an astrological level. So it may be a question of, take your pick. What configuration do you want to focus on? But probably the most basic thing to consider is the new moon. All of us are going to be affected by this new moon. It's at the end of Taurus. And so you could say, Aries, that this new moon is quite materialistic, in an earth sign. And it might mean that it is a beginning and an ending as far as a particular financial cycle is concerned. Perhaps you have had a particular attitude to your own finances. You've seen things in a particular way, and you've maybe seen some of the problems. You have ideas, you have plans, you have ambitions. All of it has got to be paid for. And you might be wondering, do you have enough? Aries as a sign, I think, does find the concept of money rather irritating. I think that many Arians, don't like to think about money. They can actually be very, very, very generous. And so, having to worry about exactly how much is in your bank account or anything like that is an irritation for many Arians. But with this new moon in Taurus, it does mean that you perhaps have to face certain realities. But with a new moon, also it is a new beginning, and it might be that you can have a different approach to your finances. Okay, you might be more grounded than usual. But perhaps there's the possibility of being more imaginative, and perhaps using your money in a slightly different way. This new moon is kind of making a square to Saturn, semi-square to Saturn. So Saturn and this new moon are 45 degrees apart, and Saturn is in Aries. And I know that sounds difficult, but it might be with this Saturn semi-square Aries. Saturn is now in your sign. It has been in your sign since the middle of February. And Saturn does suggest some kind of discipline. And so, like it or not, you can look at what you have with, a high degree of realism. So, that could be your weekend. And this weekend could just be the beginning of a new approach to your finances, and I think that you could start to become a lot more constructive and realistic. But it's not the only thing going on. When I did the video for yesterday, I Friday, I mentioned the fact that there was a conjunction between Mars and Chiron. So, this Mars-Chiron conjunction certainly could have an impact on you. It's kind of very different from what I've just been saying, talking about money. I don't think that Mars conjunct Chiron is particularly concerned about financial issues. It's got other things to worry about. Chiron, as I think I was saying on Friday, is the maverick. It likes to do things differently, and doesn't want to just follow the crowd. And you have a particular approach, and it's not that you're just trying to be an individual just for the sake of it. You perhaps believe that something has to be said, and we might be talking about issues of justice. Aries very often does have a sense of right and wrong. When they see something that isn't right, they like to talk about it. It needs to be mentioned. It needs to be brought out into the open. And so if something is not being done right, or someone is being treated unfairly with this Mars conjunct Chiron, then I think that you want to be quite sort of open and honest about it. And I think that Mars conjunct Chiron can be quite assertive. It's ready to take the initiative. Chiron is in your sign, and it's been something that you've been sort of negotiating, and you have been thinking about the world and how it's been unfolding. And perhaps you also feel that just the current situation is just not good enough. And I might be referring here to the overall situation, the world in which you live. But it could also be about yourself and your own ambitions. And, you look at what you've done, you look at what you've achieved, and you've been successful up to a point. But this weekend, you may feel that really, you could be going a lot further. And, some Arians may believe that, now is a time when you have to really push yourself. It might be the weekend. What is it? A weekend in May should be unspectacular. But you have goals, you have ambitions. And I don't think it's going to be the kind of weekend where you're just going to want to do nothing, when you're just going to want to relax, contemplate, think, do nothing in particular. No, I don't think that's going to be satisfactory. And so, Aries, I would suggest that you make the most of it. And if there's something you want, then I would suggest that you really do. You do go for it. Now, the weekend kind of has a bit of a change when the moon moves into Gemini. So, London time, early on Sunday, the moon does move from out of Taurus into Gemini. So perhaps that means that the power of the new moon will maybe dissipate. And if you're in the Americas, then Saturday evening, the moon will move out of Taurus. So you've got you've got this new moon in Taurus, on Saturday, and so it's particularly strong when both the sun and the moon are in this sign. But as the moon moves into Gemini, things perhaps get a little less intense. And with the moon moving into Gemini at the end of the weekend and into Monday, it might be that you have more to say for yourself. And the moon is also making a conjunction to Uranus, and so you might want to make an impact, and you'll be looking at what impact you can have on other people. And the things you say can be dramatic, and that kind of links to what I've just said about Mars conjunct Chiron. You don't want to just go through the weekend, doing nothing, just making sure that everything is comfortable. No, that's not what Mars Chiron is like. So perhaps as you move into Sunday, some of the pressure that has potentially been building up through Saturday will start to hit a point where it just has to be released. And so, yeah, it might be about, what you say, what you suggest, and, you certainly can be someone who is noticeable. You've certainly got something to contribute. I mean, not everyone might be happy about it, but, Aries, you've got a sparkling personality. And as the moon moves into Gemini, you'll have an opportunity to really make everyone sit up and listen if that's what you want. Taurus, new moon in your sign, and so new moon in Taurus for you is potentially a new beginning, and it's an ending as well, of course. The lunar cycle is over, and you're ready to move on to the next stage. Whatever that stage might be, and you're able, I think, to take the initiative. You do want to take the initiative right now. You have a great deal of energy, and you might actually, Taurus, be in the kind of mood where you just want to rush in. I mean, you're not necessarily normally like that. Sometimes you tend to be more circumspect, but I think you do want action. I mean that makes sense. I mean, especially on Saturday when you've got both the sun and the moon in your sign, and also Mercury. I mean, this new moon is pretty close to Mercury. Mercury is, of course, getting ready to change signs. So that is certainly something that is coming up. Mercury moving out of Taurus, into Gemini, and so you have a lot to say, more than usual, and it's perhaps at this stage where you really start to feel the fact that Mercury and Venus are in mutual reception, are in each other's signs, and of course Mercury and Venus are just both getting ready to change sign. Mercury is, as I just said, getting ready to move into Gemini. Venus is getting ready to move into Cancer. So if something needs to be said, Taurus, then go ahead and say it. But also be aware that this new moon is on Algol, that fixed star that can be quite unpleasant. And with this new moon on Algol, you might see some unpleasantness for the first time. Now, it could be in another person, it could be in society, in your community, it could be in yourself. None of us are pleasant. I mean, at least none of us are 100% pleasant. We've all got a nasty side. And of course, I have my ascendant in Taurus, so perhaps in some respects I'm talking about myself. But, I don't want to project. But, if we take this literally, this new moon conjunct Algol, this new moon is also, by the way, semi-square Saturn. So this new moon is not entirely easy. And as something new starts, you become aware of things, for maybe the first time, or maybe something you have been aware about for a long time, but you perhaps thought that you could sweep it under the carpet. It now becomes much clearer, and so that might mean, Taurus, that before taking any new initiative, you need to think about what you're doing. You need to think about it, very carefully. Yeah, you have the energy, no doubt about it, and you have the dynamism, and you have the ability to create waves, and yeah, you have the ability to create a lot of damage. I mean, I'm not saying you will cause a lot of damage, but you could cause a lot of damage, if you are in too much of a hurry. And one does think of the metaphorical bull in a china shop. Now that idea of a bull in a china shop, which you might associate with Taurus, I mean, Taurians can be quite placid. Taurians in themselves don't always like to smash things up and just go rushing around causing as much damage as possible. That's not normally a Taurus thing, but in terms of a bull in a china shop, there just could be something you get into your head that's you just have to do something, or you have to complain about something, and in the process, yes, you could cause a lot of damage. So that means that this new moon ideally would be something of a restraining influence on you. I mean, it should be. I mean, you get ideas, you see things for the way they are, but then you kind of reflect. Ideally, one shouldn't act on a new moon, because new moons are about the beginning of something. You imagine a sort of a seed germinating, but the new moon does develop, and what happens is that we have a new moon, yes, in Taurus, but then the moon very quickly moves into Gemini. By Sunday, the moon is in Gemini, and the sun is still in Taurus, and so perhaps on Sunday you'll be in a better position to sort of understand what's going on, and also be able to understand the implications of things. And with the moon in Gemini, you get the idea of a little more sort of flexibility there, and additionally an awareness of the consequences. When we're talking about consequences, maybe financial consequences, you might have a big idea, but as you move through Sunday, you're starting to think, if you were to do that, well, what exactly would happen? And it might occur to you that things might not be great. That you might have to rein in some of your ideas, because perhaps they could be expensive, or at least financially dangerous. Now, another thing going on over the weekend is that Venus is moving towards a sextile of Mars. So Venus and Mars have been moving towards this sextile for quite a long time, quite a few days, but now it's getting really close, and so by the end of a weekend, Venus and Mars will be within a degree of each other. And so if we're talking about Venus and Mars making a sextile, that could say something about other people, and about one person in particular. And so if you look at the people around you, it may occur to you that you and one particular person are getting closer, or at least there's a possibility of getting closer. I mean, the sextile is not like a trine. A sextile does require a little more effort. Trine's just easy. They come together very easily. It's about no resistance. With a sextile, there is a bit of resistance. So that implies a degree of effort. So if you can show some effort, then Taurus, I think that there is a chance that one particular relationship is really moving in an interesting area. But it does seem that we're talking about a relationship that will only work when both you and the other person change. I mean, okay, you don't have to completely change, but there just seems to be a change of approach is required in order for the deal to be done. And of course, if we're talking about relationships, it can be any kind of relationship. It might be friendship, business partnership, yeah, sure, it could be romantic, whatever. But there is some scope here for you and someone else to really be very close, provided that both of you are prepared to make some kind of compromise, and that compromise is perhaps represented by those two planets changing sign. Gemini. So there is some attention here on Mercury. Mercury is, of course, your ruler. And Mercury is right at the end of Taurus. You can see that at midnight on Sunday, Mercury is at 29 degrees. What's that? 29 degrees 25 Taurus. So Mercury absolutely getting ready to move into Gemini. And of course, Mercury rules Gemini. So the moment Mercury moves into Gemini, you should really feel that. Mercury, as it moves into Gemini, it will start making a conjunction to Uranus. Now, as far as when Mercury moves into Gemini, I mean, I should have written it down. I didn't, but let me just look it up. When Mercury moves into Gemini, so Mercury moves into Gemini. Let me just see. I should have had this on hand. It moves on Sunday at what's that? 11:26 in the morning on Sunday London time. So on Sunday Mercury makes for change, and I think that straight away you feel it. I mean, it is the real sort of beginning of the Gemini season. Because don't forget, next week the Sun moves into Gemini. So straight away that makes you more vibrant, perhaps more intelligent. Can you be made more intelligent by Mercury changing sign? I mean, intelligence is supposed to be something quite static. Intelligence tests are supposed to have a degree of reliability. So if you take an intelligence test one week and then you take it again the next week, you should have roughly the same score. So maybe I'm talking about an increase in intelligence, not necessarily in a strict psychometric kind of way, but rather you just might be sharper and perhaps more interesting as well, because Mercury is making that conjunction to Uranus. But additionally, when you've got Mercury, right at the end of Taurus, or just about to move into Gemini, you're kind of on the cusp. I mean, there's no such thing as a cusp really in astrology. I mean, I must make that clear. It's people talk about it, but really, you're either one side or the other. So you can't be in a situation where you start to gain some Gemini. I don't know. Gain some Gemininess as you move through Taurus. It's not like that at all. It's either one thing or the other. The analogy I like to use is, in Washington State. Marijuana is legal. The state east of Washington is Idaho, where it's definitely not legal. So if you were over 21 and you were allowed to have marijuana in a sealed container in the back of your car in Washington State, and as you drove east, towards the Idaho border, you would continue. You wouldn't be breaking the law. You wouldn't be breaking the law anymore just because you're getting close to Idaho. So if you're 10 yards from the Idaho border, you're still not breaking the law. It's not like the rules are gradually changing. But the moment you cross that border, the moment you're in Idaho, the rules have completely changed. If you get stopped by the Idaho police, you're definitely broken the law. I mean, you might go to prison. I mean, who knows? I don't really know about Idaho law. So it's not like a situation as you move from Washington to Idaho that marijuana is slowly becoming more illegal. It's a one-off thing. There's no cusp. You're either on one side of the border or the other. Quite what happens when you get stopped. If you got stopped in your car and that package of marijuana was exactly on the border, well, that might be sort of a different question. But you see what I mean. There is no cuspal zone. You're either in one sign or you're in another sign, and it is a big change. And you're on Sunday when Mercury moves into Gemini, you really feel it. But it does also mean that while Mercury is in very, very late Taurus on Saturday, you possibly shouldn't be making any firm commitments or plans, especially as we've got a new moon on Saturday. So that new moon, right at the end of Taurus, is something to think about. And this new moon, to begin with, might create a degree of uncertainty. You're just not sure, and there could be things that you're uncomfortable about on Saturday. You're just not quite sure how to respond. And Mercury on Saturday, it's making a semi-sextile to Mars. It's making a semi-sextile to Chiron. So Mercury semi-sextile Mars and Chiron, you kind of know that there's something you're supposed to be doing, but quite what is it? And it might be that there is an action that you need to take on Saturday, and it would be ideal if you could take it, but for some reason you're not, or if you are taking it, it's really difficult, and perhaps you just have to wait for this new moon to play out. And the new moon is in late Taurus, but the moon does move into Gemini on Saturday and Sunday. So in fact, what's happening is it's not just Mercury moving into Gemini, it's the moon moving into Gemini as well. So I think that this weekend could be a real changeover for you, and I think that Saturday could be a very different day from Sunday. Saturday is a day which is very much at the end of something, whereas Sunday, I think, is something of a new beginning. So an important weekend, and in the end, by the end of this weekend, you're going to have a much higher degree of certainty and also excitement and positivity. So if you start the weekend feeling a little bit negative and sort of unsure of yourself, well, don't worry, because I think it will be a very different situation. At the end of the weekend, as you move into the new week. Cancer. New moon in Taurus, and this new moon, in some respects, is positive. I mean, the moon's in Taurus. The moon is exalted in Taurus, and it could be a new moon that is relatively sociable. So you might say with this new moon that it is a time for reconsidering your social life, who you're going to mix with, who you're going to meet. And I think if you're surrounded by the right people on Saturday, you can really sort of come over sort of very well. But Cancer, you're kind of thinking that something is coming to an end. I know it says it's a new moon, or at least I say it's a new moon. It is a new moon, but it's a new moon that is late in Taurus. It's conjunct Algol. So Algol, this fixed star, the Gorgon's head, decapitated. Something quite horrific about Algol, and feeling shocked. I'm not saying that's how you're going to feel, but it's a somewhat difficult new moon, and this might say something about how you respond to other people. You might do something on Saturday or meet people on Saturday, and you think it's going to be quite harmless, and you're not expecting to have any particular emotional response, but the very act of going places, the act of talking to people, does seem to elicit an emotional response, and you might be thinking that something isn't quite right, and you're feeling that maybe something is coming to an end. And that approach, I think is it's quite healthy, but it does represent the ending of something, and perhaps you're kind of a bit tired of your existing social scene. So maybe certain people are becoming boring, and maybe worse than boring. there's just something wrong, and you need time to reflect. And if we're talking about time for reflection, it might be that we're talking about this whole period between now and the solstice. The solstice is pretty soon. In whatever, June the 21st. When the sun goes into Cancer, and you're feeling that you just need time to think it through. But Venus next week. Venus moves into Cancer, so planets are moving into Cancer, particularly Venus moving into Cancer, and Jupiter's already in Cancer, and so there needs to be a change here. And so I'm not saying you need to be completely isolated, but just something needs to change, and it might represent a change of personnel. The old people, not the old people as in chronological age, but people from the past who have they've maybe passed their sell-by date, and they're not doing you any good. And so if you want to meet new people who are more in line, more aligned to your own sort of aspirations, then this new moon might represent an important change. And as you move through Sunday, I think Sunday is possibly a day when you do need time to reflect. Not just Sunday, but probably Monday as well. But then Venus is, as I said, Venus is about to move into Cancer. The moon will be in Cancer pretty soon. So early next week, I think that you'll have a chance to reassess things, and I think you're going to be sort of more yourself at the beginning of next week. So as far as this weekend, particularly Sunday, don't feel that there's anything that you absolutely have to do. Leo. New moons are often important for Leos. That makes sense, doesn't it? The sun is your ruler. And so when you've got a new moon, that by definition involves the sun. Sun conjunct the moon, moon conjunct the sun. And this new moon is in Taurus, and it's in a fixed sign. It's in an important angle of your chart, and so with the new moon in Taurus, it might say something about your ambitions, what it is that you are trying to achieve. And this new moon is late in Taurus, because very soon both those planets, both the sun and the moon, are going to be in Gemini. In fact, on Sunday the moon moves into Gemini, maybe even late on Saturday, and then in a couple of days' time it will be the sun moving into Gemini. So there is a changeover. And with this new moon, Leo, you might feel that just there's something that has to be got together. It's not something that can necessarily wait. And this new moon, because it's late in Taurus, it's not just a beginning, it's also an ending. So it's an ending in terms of one cycle as far as your ambitions are concerned, and the beginning of something new. But it's something that has perhaps been brewing for a bit of time, and sort of now you feel that you have to sort of get it together, and you have to get it together because you have a goal, you have a set of ambitions, but it's more than that. You have to get it together because you can also see the resistance, you can see the problems, you can see how things could unfold in the future. This might be because this new moon is conjunct Algol. So Algol is of course a fixed star associated with disaster, with things going wrong, the evil that people do. That might be one way of looking at Algol. But all of these things could have an impact on your ambitions. And if people are behaving badly, or if you've got difficult circumstances, that might prevent you doing many of the things that you actually would like to do. And So this new moon could elicit in you a certain protectiveness, a feeling that you have to take action to look after yourself, and being aware that you can't trust everyone. Because one thing we have with this new moon is semi-square Saturn. The Sun is semi-square Saturn, and Sun semi-square Saturn is not an easy energy. It can be about something holding you back. You may be being afraid of something. And it might relate to the past, or there could be some moral quibbles. By that I mean you might have something that you really want to put into action. You can see how it could be successful. But at the same time, you're worried about whether it's right. Whether it's morally right. If you were to do whatever you wanted to do, maybe it would be bad. Maybe you would be undermining your own moral code. Now, that's just something you have to reflect on. There are no easy answers. And it might be the case, Leo, that you can proceed with your plans, but just change them ever so slightly to ensure that you are on the right side of your own moral code. You don't want to do something that is unethical. But maybe the Sun semi-square Saturn could be about just feelings of guilt, or these feelings of guilt might just be quite unnecessary. But there still seems to be something holding you back, over the weekend, particularly on Saturday. And additionally, the Sun semi-square Saturn might say something about relationships. Someone not necessarily being sympathetic to you. You feeling that because of another person, you can't do everything you want to do. Or it just could be that you and someone else aren't getting on with one another. And so if you try to do something, in a partnership or with other people, particularly with one other person, then it might go wrong. Or just there could be, just general incompatibilities, differences of opinion. So maybe, Leo, there is an argument for doing things on your own. If you're doing things with other people, again, particularly with one other person, then it just might feel unsatisfactory, and we might just be talking about differences of opinion. But I don't want to take away from this weekend. I don't want to undermine this weekend. I mean, there is a new moon, and if you get it right, Leo, you can have a clear sense of direction, and you have an idea about what needs to be done. You also have an awareness of the timetable. You know that you can't hang on forever, and with that the fact that this new moon is semi-square Saturn, that might actually give you the discipline you need in order to see things through and to actually make sure that you reach your destination. Virgo. Well, Virgo, we have a new moon. I mean, I have to talk about the new moon. This new moon affects everyone, and it certainly affects you. Is it a critically important new moon? Well, the new moon is conjunct Mercury, and Mercury is right at the end of Taurus, and with a new moon conjunct Mercury, that might mean that for you, Virgo, you feel that it is a change, that something has shifted, and it's happening in preparation for something else. So you have your own ideas. You perhaps have your own philosophy, and maybe even your own spirituality, and you have all of this, and something has shifted on a philosophical level. Your ideas are changing. You feel that something is, intellectually possible, whereas, not so long ago it seemed to be impossible. So your ideas are there. You can certainly see how something might work intellectually. And in addition, I think it gives you a certain amount of vision. And vision, I think, at the moment, Virgo, really does matter. Particularly on Saturday, you need to have a vision to recognise that something is possible. And once you have that vision, then that creates the possibility of actually something real happening, in the real world. And this new moon, it's a bit of a split thing, because this new moon takes place at 26 degrees Taurus, but both the sun and the moon over the next few days are going to change sign. The sun and the moon are both going to move into Gemini. The moon will in fact move into Gemini on Sunday, or even late on Saturday if you're in the Americas. And so with that change, you perhaps move from theory into practice. So you have the idea perhaps on Saturday, but by Sunday the new moon is developing, and it's no longer theoretical, and you start to think about all of the things that you could be doing. But it's not an entirely easy process. On Saturday there are things that might be annoying you, that you kind of would like to be able to break free, but there's something holding you back. It may be a person holding you back, or it could be some kind of worry getting in your way, or it could be some concern about whether or not you're doing the right thing. And so you might feel a bit conflicted on Saturday, but I think that on Sunday things are going to become sort of more straightforward. And one thing happening on Sunday is Mercury moving into Gemini. The moon moves into Gemini, but Mercury moves into Gemini, and Mercury is of course your ruler, and Mercury in Gemini, well, Mercury rules Gemini. So Mercury becomes very strong once it moves into Gemini, and Mercury starts to make a conjunction to Uranus. So that means, Virgo, that Sunday could actually be quite an inspiring day. But it goes beyond inspiration. It moves from inspiration to action. You can start to see what you could do, what you could accomplish, and and the new moon is really going to start working for you. But to begin with, first half of the weekend, Saturday, it may feel that things aren't moving, that you feel a bit conflicted, but keep going. And I think by Sunday, Virgo, you should really start to see what is possible and what you can do, and it may be a time for you to really start to think about action. We're no longer talking about anything theoretical. It is about action, and I think that you're going to be able to really get things off the ground, and this process will continue as you move into the new week. Libra. Don't forget, Libra, that Venus is getting ready to change sign. At the beginning of the week, Venus will move, out of Gemini and into Cancer, and I think that that movement is pretty fortunate. I think it's fortunate in terms of you being able to get yourself together and to be able to really concentrate on the things that are important to you. But as far as this weekend is concerned, okay, Venus is still in Gemini, and Venus is making a sextile to Mars. So that Venus sextile Mars might say quite a lot about relationships and how relationships are developing. We could understand Venus sextile Mars as you moving towards another person. One can literally see that you are Venus, Mars is someone else, Mars is Mars is in Aries. Mars is in very late Aries, so it could be someone who is at the moment in quite a strong position. That strong position is not necessarily going to last forever, and so it might be someone whose strength may in some respects be working against them, or they might seem just stubborn. They're not prepared to shift, but you are making progress in terms of making an impact. So this might be about a relationship developing. So if you've been trying to get hold of someone, if you've been trying to get noticed, slowly you are being successful, and maybe over the weekend you'll see some evidence of this success. And as far as existing relationships are concerned, I do think that this Venus sextile Mars is really positive, and it really is worth maintaining your effort to get on with that person. Again, if this person has an important role in your life, and maybe there have been recent issues, recent incompatibilities, but Venus sextile Mars, does indicate perhaps that if someone has been difficult in a recent past, that some of those difficulties are going to start to ease, and maybe they'll ease because this person's strength is going to perhaps lose something, because Mars is about to move out of Aries and into Taurus. So when Mars moves out of Aries into Taurus, Mars moves out of its own sign and into a sign Taurus where it is in its detriment. So that Venus sextile Mars might say something also about any situation where you're dealing with any kind of rivalry. So just because someone right now appears to be in a strong position, appears to hold all the cards, it doesn't mean to say that it is always going to be like that. I think that things could change. Now, one thing going on over the weekend, arguably the main thing going on over the weekend, is a new moon. So we've got a new moon on Saturday. I think actually the new moon will be on Sunday if you're in Australia or New Zealand or East Asia. In fact, all of Asia, I think. But anyway, we've got this new moon. It's a new moon in Taurus. So this new moon may make you feel just slightly concerned. It's not a particularly easy new moon. I don't think it's an easy new moon for anyone, really. But this new moon might actually say something about relationships and give you an idea about who, not just any particular relationship, but relationships in general, and also things in your life that might have been holding you back, might have been blocking you, and it just might be an awareness of what is blocking you, who is blocking you, and how you are responding to the situation. And your immediate response to the new moon might be just to hold firm and not to reveal anything. And you might take the view, especially on Saturday, that things are a bit heavy, are a bit difficult. But the new moon does develop, and so you've got the sun and the moon making this conjunction. It's 26 degrees Taurus, and then the moon moves on. It moves into Gemini. So on Sunday, with the moon moving into Gemini, things do get easier, and you can start to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And so if you have been regarding everything as being really heavy on Saturday, by Sunday, I think that things are getting easier, and you're having a greater sense of your own power and your ability to create change, and you won't be so constrained either. I think with the moon moving into Gemini, you can start to see possibilities and also alternative views, and that might not have been quite so easy on Saturday. So Saturday, it doesn't seem that there are any alternatives. You are just stuck somewhere. You can't see the way out. But by Sunday, things change. As the moon moves into Gemini, there are different possibilities, and you're aware that you can escape from something in many different ways. Scorpio. On Friday, I talked at some length about Mars conjunct Chiron and how it might impact the average Scorpio. I probably talked too much about it, but this Mars Chiron conjunction is still operational. It's exact on Saturday, so you will continue to feel its influence. And I don't want to talk too much about it, but Mars conjunct Chiron, you may feel that you do want to do things differently, and that might be about how you express yourself, feeling that you have to be a maverick being a word that one can link with Chiron, doing things differently, and also doing things which might upset the status quo. Chiron does not like the status quo, and if everyone is feeling satisfied, everything's fine, let's not worry about things. No, Chiron, might not be too happy about that and might want to cause disruption. And there could be a feeling with Chiron, and particularly as it's conjunct Mars, that it links with that sort of old idea that there is a difference between how does it go? Comforting the disturbed and disturbing the comfortable. I think that dichotomy really does link with Chiron, in fact. And perhaps you have to ask yourself, what are you doing? Which side of it? Which side of that formulation are you on? Do you feel that you have to comfort the disturbed? I mean, Chiron is a healing energy. That's part of what it's about, and so your own healing abilities, as I said on Friday, are probably better than usual. So if you're involved in healing over the weekend, whether it's healing yourself, healing other people, then I think you could be more effective than usual. But then there's that other side, disturbing the comfortable, and that is Chiron the Maverick. Chiron doesn't like to just follow the crowd, just accept the status quo. Sometimes things need to be disrupted, and if everyone is, feeling happy and comfortable and everything's fine, well, maybe something's wrong, and Chiron needs to be heard, and it can be disturbing. It can be really disturbing. Well, that's what it means, disturbing the comfortable. But we should not be too complacent about anything. So that is how the Mars conjunct Chiron, could be working. And so do think about how it might be working in your life. Just think about the symbolism of Mars and Chiron. Mars and Chiron. Mars is your ruler. Mars rules Scorpio. It is impacted by Chiron, and Mars is strong. It's still in Aries. Of course, it's about to move into Taurus. Now, talking about Taurus, we have a new moon this weekend, and this new moon is in your opposite sign, Taurus being opposite Scorpio. So, if you're talking about a new moon in Taurus, well, that could well say something about relationships, how you relate to other people, and it might mean that there is a new beginning. The classic way of looking at a new moon, something new is starting. But this new moon is quite late in the sign, quite late in Taurus. 26 of a sign. So it could be about an ending and a beginning, perhaps the ending of a particular cycle in a particular relationship, and the start of something new. And is it going to be easy? Well, the problem with this new moon is that it is semi-square Saturn, and it is conjunct Algol. And Algol is a fixed star often associated with bad things. I'm not saying anything bad is going to happen, but it might occur to you with this new moon that certain relationships are a real pain, and they could be kind of dragging you down. I'm not talking necessarily about romantic relationships, just someone you happen to be involved with. May not be someone, maybe a group, maybe different people you happen to be involved with, and you're thinking, well, how useful are they really? What are they doing? Maybe they're holding you back, and you might reach some decisions about certain people in that Scorpio kind of way. I mean, Scorpio can be very silent. The wheels are working away, and something just suddenly occurs to you, and it's obvious. It's been obvious for a long time, but you haven't actually taken the action. But with this new moon, suddenly everything becomes very clear. So I think that this new moon should be, or could be, it could be quite difficult. It would be particularly difficult if you are holding on to the past. I mean, that's something that some Scorpios do. They do hold on. They don't want change. But when there is no option, Scorpios can change very quickly. And this might be how the new moon is working. And additionally, Scorpio, right now you are absolutely not satisfied with things, and things might be fine, but you're not satisfied. As far as you're concerned, there is always going to be room for improvement, and that's not just about other people or the world in which you're living. It's about you yourself. I think right now, Scorpio, you are actually judging yourself quite harshly, and if you're not moving fast enough, if you're not making enough progress, that's not going to make you happy. And so that means, Scorpio, perhaps you're going to want to push yourself this weekend. Is that a good thing? I think it probably is a good thing, provided you don't take things too far. You have to look after yourself. You have to look after your health. But if you have the capacity and the energy, then, Scorpio, perhaps you should make a real effort to do things as well as you possibly can. And if you are completely focused, it might mean by the end of a weekend you've really accomplished quite a lot. Sagittarius, we're about to see the moon moving into Gemini. So on Sunday, certainly Sunday, the moon moves into Gemini, or sort of late on Saturday. And so with the moon moving into Gemini, that might say something about relationships. I mean, after all, the moment the moon moves into Gemini, it makes a conjunction to Uranus. But it's not just the moon moving into Gemini. We've got Mercury moving into Gemini on Sunday. With this increasing emphasis on Gemini, that might mean that certain people have to be taken seriously. They might start to have an impact on you, for better or for worse. You may have to get used to other people's erratic behavior. Maybe you'll see someone doing something or suggesting something that you hadn't really planned on doing. And so that is one way of looking at Gemini. Things happening from the outside, perhaps inflicted on you by another person. But you shouldn't forget that Gemini and Sagittarius, they are part of the same axis, and maybe every Sagittarius has a hidden side to them, which is pure Gemini. Your inner Gemini. What is your inner Gemini? Well, Sagittarius is a fast sign, and in general, Sagittarians are looking for action. They're looking for excitement. They're looking for connections, and when other people ask questions and they try to analyze the thing, that kind of irritates you. but maybe this Gemini is about your inner analysis. You trying to at an inner level, you're trying to work things out, and you're trying to see alternative views. But you just might get annoyed by other people coming up with alternatives, being a bit unstable, being a bit flaky. But maybe that's reminding you of your own inner flakiness, or your own questioning nature that you're not taking seriously. So if someone is asking a lot of questions and you don't want to listen to those questions, maybe it's you asking those questions, or you wanting to ask those questions, but you just haven't been prepared to do it. So perhaps you should sort of initiate things and not take things at face value. And so that might be how this Gemini emphasis starts to work. And of course, the Sun is going to move into Gemini. Very soon. Gemini season will be upon you. And yes, you've got Mercury moving into Gemini, and so I don't think it's just about projection. I think it is about other people and what other people are doing. And with Mercury moving into Gemini, that might mean that you've underestimated someone. You thought you understood them. You thought they were going to behave in the same old way, and then they just do something different. They confound your expectations. So that's a lot of stuff on Sunday, and I kind of shouldn't have really talked about Sunday first. I should have started with Saturday. So if we to think about Saturday, well, the main thing going on Saturday is that we've got a new moon at the end of Taurus, and this new moon, it might well be about your own routines, what you're doing over the course of the day, how you are structuring your life, and it may occur to you with this new moon in Taurus that you perhaps need more routines. You need a greater structure in your life, and perhaps you can find it. Perhaps it is a good idea to be more organized. But at the same time, it might also occur to you that some of the things going on in your life which you've taken for granted are no longer working, and perhaps you need to change the way you are organizing things, running things. That a bit of variety is soon going to be required, and perhaps you'll suddenly realize that you've been constraining yourself. Now, that's not something the average Sagittarius wants to do. I mean, Sagittarius is a very freedom-loving sign. You'd like to think that you can do what you like, that you are not being structured. But now you see things, and you look at what you're doing, and you can see actually you have been constrained, and you've probably been constrained by yourself. Now, it might seem that you're being constrained by other people, but in fact it's probably yourself. You've perhaps found it easier to stick to the same old routines, and these routines may have just really have outlived their usefulness. So perhaps this new moon is asking you to end one set of routines and to perhaps introduce something else, or perhaps introduce nothing else. Perhaps you need a period of freedom where you're not tied down to anything. I'm not saying you should do that, but I mean, certainly that might be something you want to consider. Capricorn. In one sense, Capricorn, you're feeling quite free. You feel this weekend that there are many different possibilities. You look at the world with an open mind, and there might be things that appear to be holding you back, but you know that there's always a way forward. That there's no such thing as a dead end. And however pessimistic other people are, you yourself can see the way forward. And you at the same time, you have a powerful sense, of your own creative capacity. I mean, after all, we do have a new moon in Taurus, new moon in an Earth sign, and I think that this new moon for you is I think positive. Not everyone can deal with this new moon, but it perhaps reminds you that there are things that really can be achieved, can be done, and there's no need to be shy or to feel that you're not good enough. It really can be a new beginning, but new beginnings, often require some work, and we have a new moon at the end of Taurus. Then Sunday the moon moves on. It moves out of Taurus and moves into Gemini, and it makes a conjunction to Uranus. And it just might occur to you that if there are things you want to do which are essentially fundamental to who you are and fundamental to your real creative self, you're going to have to create the space, and you're going to have to insist on being respected. Make sure you've got time. Make sure your time is respected. And so this might be something you might want to work on through sort of Sunday and into the beginning of next week, making sure that you are really given the opportunity to make the most of who you are. So it is quite fundamental there. And it might be that the key to being an individual is to make sure that the space in which the individual works and functions is just as clear as is possible. You don't want complications. You want everything to be straightforward, and you can insist on that. And so if other people are dragging their feet, refusing to create changes, maybe it's your family, maybe others, they're refusing to create changes. Well, maybe you need to be quite firm with them. I mean, I think you can be quite disciplined, because one thing about this new moon is that it is semi-square Saturn. So it's exactly semi-square Saturn. I mean, this is a big feature of this new moon. It's one of the reasons why I think that this new moon could, for some of us, be quite difficult. But I think for you, this new moon's semi-square Saturn, I think it is quite disciplined, and it does allow you to do things on your terms. So it's about you being creative, unfurling your creativity on your terms, making sure that you are given the respect you need. And I think that you can be quite tough with this new moon and insist on certain things, but at the same time never forgetting your core optimism. It's an optimism that maybe is not shared. Other people might not get it, but you can see how things are developing, and you realize that if you're given the space you need, then there is actually quite a lot you can accomplish. You accomplish it, through hard work, perhaps, but you do get there in the end. And at the end of a weekend, we have the moon in Gemini making a sextile to Saturn, and so that moon sextile Saturn, may be an answer to the new moon. So the new moon is semi-square Saturn, and then it turns into a sextile. So a semi-square is quite a difficult aspect, but you work with it, and so by the end of a weekend, you really understand how to work with the new energies, and that does allow you to make your presence felt. And also, as far as relationships are concerned, that moon sextile Saturn puts you in a position where you have quite a high level of control, and the people that matter are prepared to give you a considerable degree of respect. Aquarius. We have a new moon. I mean, the new moon is the main event of the of the weekend. And this new moon is in Taurus. So this new moon in Taurus might say something about where you live, your attitude to where you live. And this new moon is it's very late in Taurus. Okay, it's not right at the end of the sign, but it's at 26 degrees Taurus, so pretty late in the sign. And this new moon may be about realization. You start to see things, perhaps relating to your home. You understand your home in a new way. You perhaps see some of the problems of where you're living. This new moon is not entirely easy. I mean, it's conjunct Algol, that rather difficult fixed star associated with Medusa, the Gorgon's head, her hair turned into snakes. And so there is a difficulty there, and there is a sense in which it's quite a freaked out new moon. And so, there could be realizations about home and family, which may not always be easy. But, it's a realization, and it's a realization which has been developing. And it might be that you feel that it is now time for a change. And this new moon is making a semi-square to Saturn. So, Saturn is your ruler. As far as I'm concerned, Saturn rules Aquarius. And so with this realization, you might feel challenged to say something. You kind of don't want to say it, but you perhaps feel that you don't have a choice. You might want to state things which are perhaps completely obvious. They are obvious. People do listen. I mean, are they going to like what you say? Probably not. But some things do just do have to be said, and so just do think about your relationship to your home and your family. And with this new moon, you can see what's wrong, and I think that is good. If you can see what's wrong, then you're in a position to make a change. And I think it's been developed. It has been developing, for quite a long time. But this new moon does change. It's in late Taurus, but by Sunday the moon moves out of Taurus. It moves into Gemini, and we've also got Mercury moving into Gemini. And I do think that overall Sunday should be an easier day than Saturday. On Sunday, as these planets start to move into Gemini, and of course Mercury starts making a conjunction to Uranus, you yourself feel just easier, and you see more possibilities, and at the same time you're becoming, I think, a lot more positive. And so if you thought that opportunities were being denied to you, that you couldn't get things together, that it was a hostile world, by the end of a weekend, I think you're feeling a lot better about it. But this does raise a question of relationships, and if you're going to feel better about things, to what extent are other people going to be a help or a hindrance? And it could well be the case, Aquarius, that other people might be a hindrance. I mean, I think that's more on Saturday than Sunday, but it could move into Sunday. And I just think that agreement might be quite difficult to arrive at, especially on Saturday. And even if you get on very well with someone, that doesn't mean to say that you're going to reach the same conclusions. And there might well be some kind of argument, or if not an argument, just a general incompatibility, a passing incompatibility, but certainly a block. And so if that is the case, maybe certainly on Saturday, you should try to do things yourself. Don't necessarily feel that you have to get another person's approval, or even feel that you have to explain something to another person, because they might not get it, they might not understand. And so if you do things, on your own, the important things on your own, that might be the best approach. Pisces. Things are starting to move into Gemini. I mean, they're already in Gemini. I mean, you've already got Uranus in Gemini. You've got Venus in Gemini, although Venus is not going to stay in Gemini for much longer. In a few days' time, it will move out of Gemini and move into Cancer. But with this growing Gemini emphasis, certainly Sunday, Monday, with this Gemini emphasis, it may say something about where you want to put your energies, and also where change might occur. And what we might be talking about is your home, where you're living. You might regard your home as being something stable, as a constant in your life. But Uranus has moved into Gemini quite recently, and you're perhaps still getting used to Uranus in Gemini. Maybe it hasn't occurred to you yet that Uranus is in Gemini. But when the Moon makes a conjunction to Uranus, it reminds you that something has changed. And then Mercury is going to make a conjunction to Uranus, I think, on Monday, because Mercury is moving into Gemini, and so that gives you a chance to think again about your home. And you've looked at your home obviously loads and loads of times, and you've reached the same conclusions, or you appear to have reached the same conclusions. And then this weekend you might, or particularly on Sunday, you might start to see things in a different way. Something new occurs to you, and you're thinking, well, things could be better. Things might need to be changed, and you might start to think about the impermanence of things. Some things don't last forever. Even if you've been living in the same place for years and years, in the end, it's very likely you're going to move. And so the concept of relocation might be important. I mean, at least that is a way of looking at it. And also think about the people around you in your home, your family, also your neighbours as well. We do have a new moon in Taurus on Saturday, and so new moon in Taurus might say something about your neighbours and how you relate to your neighbours. And this new moon is on Algol, and it's semi-square Saturn. So some Pisceans might experience that new moon as being, difficult neighbours, being aware of your neighbours. When I say neighbours, it's not just people living next to you. It could be people living above you, below you, the people you meet all the time. And there just could be a level of irritation which you perhaps hadn't fully expected. So I'm not saying that this weekend is going to be, entirely easy. I think that Pisces, you may be aware that not everyone is pleasant, and it's just the way it is. I mean, it's nothing that necessarily has to be complained about, but you perhaps see the world for what it really is, and perhaps the key thing is not to take it too seriously. The world is the world, and if we all open our eyes, we can see how bad things are. So it's not like you have any particular sort of uniquely negative experience. But I do think that this weekend overall is a time for reflection. And as far as this new moon is concerned, it may create some concerns. And this new moon is square Saturn as well, and that new moon square Saturn might mean that there might be a sort of a new financial issue crops up or starts to come into consciousness. I mean, it needn't be a serious issue, but there's just some new financial pressure that needs to be accepted, needs to be worked on, and the sooner you work on it, the better. But maybe that's not a problem. It all depends on your own circumstances. So I'd love to say that it's going to be a great weekend, but I think it's it could be a bit trying, but if you just hold firm to what you believe in, and you don't feel that you have to do anything, and you don't jump to conclusions, and you allow things to develop, then I think things should be okay. And also, Venus is about to move into Cancer next week, and I think Venus moving into Cancer is going to mitigate things. And I think you're going to perhaps be less intense and less focused on yourself once Venus moves into Cancer. But that is something I will be talking about next week. So those are my forecasts for the 12 signs, and now it's time to look at the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is the weekend going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 14, which is possession in great measure. This is a good hexagram, if one can say that some hexagrams are good and some hexagrams are bad, but possession in great measure does give us this idea of having a lot and perhaps being able to gain a lot. And when we're talking about possessions, we're not just talking about material possessions. We're talking about our wisdom, our knowledge, our experience, everything we have, everything that is part of who we are. So we do have a lot, but that doesn't mean to say that we need to boast about it. We need to be modestly accepting of who we are, and also accept that other people have their views. We certainly shouldn't be boasting, and I think that is a big message in terms of this hexagram. And this hexagram, it does have 3 moving lines. So with 3 moving lines, that does indicate that over the course of a weekend there are going to be changes. We're going to think we're in one state of mind, and something changes, perhaps because of something external happens. So we have to be prepared to sort of keep moving, ducking and diving, and that's how the weekend is going to be sort of developing. Now, the third line moves, and with the third line moving, it's very important that we don't take things too far, and that we understand our own station. And we can't be immodest. That's certainly important. And also we have to be aware of our connection with the wider world, and if we do have things, what are they for? And there is a capacity for meanness, and there's a capacity for generosity. And this might say, well, what kind of person are we? And I think that the I Ching is telling us that our possessions need to be shared. I mean, that's not about giving everything away, giving all your money away. It's more about being available, and not just holding on to everything. You've got some ideas, you've got stuff, and you just want to keep it all to yourself. That's not what the universe wants. The universe, in the first instance, is looking for generosity, and also humbleness. And that's particularly the case with the fourth line. With the fourth line moving, there seems to be a certain imbalance between ourselves and the people around us. And it might be that in spite of us having a lot, it may be that some of other people have even more. The Wilhelm translation with the fourth line talks about rich neighbors. We have rich neighbors, and it's saying we shouldn't look to the left, we shouldn't look to the right, and we certainly shouldn't be looking too hard at other people's wealth. You know, that's always the case, isn't it? I mean, it's all comparative. You know, what makes us miserable is not being poor, but being poor compared to our rich neighbours. So don't make comparisons and don't look too hard at what your neighbours are doing. It's all about you, and it's what you have, and that is the right way to deal with things. And then the top line moves, and top line is a great line, and it is about being modest, but through modesty you get the blessings of the universe. So you have what you have. You make the most of all of your possessions, and you don't, of course, boast about it. You perhaps take the view that everyone has possessions in great measure, but different people have different types of possessions, and it's not like anyone is better or richer than anyone else. So you have that modest approach, and the universe smiles on you. So in the end, that does look good. And because we've got 3 moving lines, that means we move to a second hexagram, and that second hexagram is hexagram number 19, which is approach. So with approach, I mean, that may talk about getting close to someone or close to something. In the end, we find ourselves maybe it says something about a relationship. Maybe that's what happens in the end in this weekend. Maybe a relationship starts to develop. But approach needn't be about one person. It's about getting close to one particular thing, something that can really work for us, at least in the short term. But we do know how to quit. We do need to know when to quit. So if we do get involved with something by the end of a weekend, it's certainly fortunate. It's all going in the right direction. But we probably should see it as a temporary involvement, because the I Ching says that when the 8th month arrives, there is misfortune. The 8th month is late summer, so late summer, northern hemisphere. What is that? I don't know. I'm not a great expert on the Chinese calendar, but that would be sort of August, September. So it might be that you start to get involved with something which would work in your favor, but not forever. I mean, that might just be that you work with it, but then you quit while you're ahead, and you just accept that everything eventually goes into decline. But short term, there is a situation you are moving into which could work in your favor. Maybe we can take the I Ching literally. Maybe over the northern hemisphere summer, you should be working with someone, and you and someone else, you can really cooperate very well, but you just need to know when the thing comes to an end. I mean, that is a way of looking at it. But overall, I think that the weekend does look good. But the important thing is to be modest and not to be mean. And you've got lots of stuff, and it's important that you share it. But when I say stuff, I'm not talking about giving away your goods and your belongings. It's more about sharing your insights and your wisdom. So thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you have a great weekend. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description. And I will talk to you again very soon.